Google had this story around start with the monkey. If you get a difficult project, start with the most difficult part of the project, because if you can't make that work, the rest of it isn't going to work.
Being adaptable, you've got to be in the right mindset, right? I think mindset guides all of us. We have to be in the right mind space to be able to see opportunities, to be able to respond to them in the right way, in the positive way or negative way.
I believe almost every single AI decision at the moment about AI systems is a two-way door, because if you're a university or a school system and you are building the world's best AI chatbot for your students, tomorrow, next week, next month, in a year's time, somebody will build a better one that you will want to switch to.
Welcome to another episode of Relearning Work, where we dive into the future of learning and work. In each episode, we bring you conversations with leaders from industry and education to challenge assumptions, propose ideas, and share learnings as we all navigate this world that is being reshaped by agentic AI. Now, whether you're an educator, a student, or a business leader looking to stay ahead in this rapidly changing landscape, there's something here for you. I'm your host, David Yip. Today, my guest is Ray Fleming, a strategic advisor in education, a former senior leader in Microsoft and Google, and recently founder of AI consultancy Stratentia, where he is a transformation catalyst, helping businesses make sense of AI and actually use it to get things done. Ray is always challenging conventional thinking about tech transformation. During a recent keynote at the Future Skills Organization's National Forum, he highlighted that the current shift from IQ to humans plus AI means technical knowledge must be paired with empathy. His latest research exposes why most AI training fails. He says teams get shown the Mona Lisa without learning to hold the pencil. Ray also co-hosts the popular AI in Education podcast, is a former Times higher education columnist, and surprisingly, a professional improv performer at Sydney Comedy Fringe. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Thank you, David. It sounds like I do a lot when you put it all like that, and I just feel like I'm surviving day to day.
Well, you certainly have a very wide spectrum of skills, from technical and AI and all cutting edge material through advising senior leaders about policy and education. But also, what's this thing about comedy and improv? That one I was a bit surprised.
Well, do you know what? This all happened at the beginning of COVID. Right at the beginning of COVID was I remember the date, March the 17th, 2020. I resigned from Microsoft to go and work from Google. And I'd been thinking about doing like a beginner's improv course to think about, like I was doing lots of keynotes and conferences. I thought maybe that would help me get to the next level. Anyway, as we know, that was the beginning of COVID. And so every time I reached the end of one of the courses, they said, hey, do you want to sign up for the next one? And like most people, no traveling, no business travel. What a wonderful opportunity to be able to say, yeah, I'm free on a Thursday night and keep going. And I ended up doing 2.5 years worth of formal improv training, graduating, and then becoming part of an improv crew. An improv comedy, I'll explain, is you make things up on the spot. It's not like stand-up, like Jimmy Carr, amazing. He's got a whole hour's worth of material that he's going to deliver. Improv isn't like that at all. You've got absolutely no idea what you're going to say when you step up on stage. And if you've ever watched those shows where the audience throw in a suggestion, it is real. Like the best way to impress people with improv is afterwards they go, oh, you knew people were going to say that, didn't you? Yeah. No, it's all made up on the spot, which is going to be very much like this conversation in the podcast, to be honest, David.
Well, it's actually very much like the world that we live in right now. We're kind of, sometimes it feels like we're making everything up as we go, right? The world around us is changing constantly. Old playbooks are just being thrown out the door, and the geopolitical environment, the technology environment, the business environment, assumptions that we've held for decades to be true no longer seems to be so. So whether it's comedy or in real life, I think there's a bit of improv skills that we all need.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, my joke a year ago was if you could spell AI, you were an expert because it was so new and we were so getting used to it. Now, things have moved on, but it's
Mm,
still a situation where nobody knows what is going to happen tomorrow. Something will be announced that
mm,
none of us had any idea was coming. So
mm,
it's really fascinating that that pace of change, that uncertainty in the future is absolutely on steroids compared to the
mm,
past.
mm. But for senior leaders, particularly executives who, people look to them for the answers, right? They're giving direction, they're driving strategy, they're, making all the all important decisions. They're used to, I guess, trying to be on top of everything. That's very disorientating, isn't it?
And I compare it to the journey that teachers have been on over the last 35 years. As the internet was created, then Wikipedia was created, suddenly the teacher wasn't the expert anymore.
Mm,
And they had to adjust the way that they worked. I remember I got quoted in a newspaper in the UK about 30 years ago for the phrase, guide on the side, not sage on the stage, which, I
mm,
think
mm,
to be able to say I don't know, let's find out is such a superpower in those
mm,
situations. And if you think about leaders in organizations, often they've got to where they are because they're an expert on something. And so really frightening to say I don't know, let's find out when you are leading a big organization where people are looking for you to have all of the answers. But let's face it, nobody's got all the answers for the
mm,
current situation.
mm. So that's where the phrase came from. Well, I was talking to my friend on this podcast, Stephen Warburton of Newcastle University,
Mm.
and that's where I first heard the term "sage on the stage" and "guide on the side." But he invented a new term, "meddler in the middle," and and so I think that's going to catch on now. But I think there is a lot of truth in that because it's I think it's a hybrid role. It's neither the guide on the side nor sage on the stage, but the meddler in the middle is where the educators now need to be, doing a bit of both.
Yeah, and probably what I guess this conversation highlights to me is actually we're in a period of change and we're in a period where probably the biggest demand is to be adaptable for whatever the future gives us because we don't know what it is going to be. That
Mm,
adaptability becomes so critical in so many roles, not just in leadership, but right across an organization and in reality right across society.
mm. But being adaptable, you've got to be in the right mindset, right? Because I think mindset guides all of us. We have to be in the right mind space to be able to see opportunities, to be respond to them in the right way, in the positive way or negative way. AI, for example, in the right mindset, it's a wonderful thing. In the wrong mindset, it could be a very scary and terrible thing. The AI hasn't necessarily changed; it's how we look at it.
No, that's exactly right. And in some organizations and some areas, we're used to having more certainty than we perhaps have now. I remember working with education systems in the past where it's like, oh, we've only just got used to this curriculum and they've gone and changed it. It was only 5 years since the last curriculum change.
Mm,
And having always worked in the technology industry, when
mm,
nobody knows what's going to happen next,
mm,
I guess I'm used to working in that environment where, the acronym is VUCA, which is horrible, but
mhm,
it stands for, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And wow, that describes where we are at the moment. If you think about
mm, mm,
the AI journey we're on, it's certainly volatile. Volatile. A number of times this year we've seen a big switch. Remember, it actually made the front page of real newspapers when DeepSeek announced a different type of AI.
mm,
Um, Uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think genuinely a lot of people have got fears for their job, their roles, and what role they're going to play in society. Now, I've always worked in businesses that have been in that environment. I guess I have just always had a mindset of continual innovation, never being sure. I'm a perpetual learner because My competition when I was at Google and Microsoft were the 21-year-old grads that knew everything, and they were my competition, and they were after my job and my career. And that's been a really fascinating challenge. But then, step back. It's not like we haven't had huge change in the last 100 years. In fact, let me take you back. Almost 100 years ago, the change that we were going through as society was that we were going from the horse to the motor car. And 1905 in New York, there were 13,800 businesses that looked after horses. Built carriages for horses, shoed horses, grew the hay for the horses. You had a whole economy that was built around horse transport. And in less than 20 years, that all disappeared and got replaced by motor transport. I guess I feel like we might be at that stage at the moment. There is a real risk that AI is the motor car, and it might kill off some of the things that we currently do and the way we do them. But just like the transition to the motor car, you create a whole new economy. We went from nearly 14,000 businesses to 90 businesses in 10 years looking after horses. But on the flip side, by 1950, 6.5% of the US population were working in mass production of cars. So at 1910, you couldn't see that was what was going to happen. You saw the disruption, you didn't see the opportunity. I think we're in a similar situation now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. And actually, I didn't realize it happened so quick, that transition, because often I think we think about, and I guess we assume that the change and the pace of change being so quick and everything is a symptom of the 21st century and the recent decades. But that was pretty substantial change more than 100 years ago, in a short space of time, within a couple of decades.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
things, yeah,
the thing I feel now is technology can make that change faster if we let it. Is an organization ready for change in the same way that technology can change? And I think different countries have different approaches. I think the US economy is more structured around change and agility than, for example, the Australian economy. Certain sectors change slowly. I remember I was doing a course with a business school where the case study was 20 years old. And it was about a new technology. And that was an eye-opening moment for me about what they thought was an acceptable pace of change versus what I was used to. And so, it isn't just about the technology itself. It isn't just about what's enabled. It's also about what's your mindset around enabling change and your techniques for managing change.
So, what kind of mindset do we need to be in to be able to thrive and adapt in this the current pace of change and what's happening around the world? Because you mentioned before, if we let it, right? And I think sometimes, maybe we feel that we have the power to let it or don't let it, right? But do we?
Yeah, it's a tsunami of change that could potentially overwhelm us. And there are aspects of technological change that we have no control over as individuals or as organizations. AI is a really, really classic example, because if you think about what it's done in the education system, we have a whole assessment system that is built about the words the students write, and we can no longer trust the word they write. if they wrote it.
And you can't just ban it, right? And don't let it in your system.
Well, no, because as an employer, we ask exactly the same question that academics ask. Academics say, did you use AI for this? And we would ask exactly the same question as employers. But if you said no, we'd ask why not? And that's a very different, because if an academic says, did you use AI for this? And you say no, you go, oh, phew. So how do we manage that transition? Because it is really important that when you're learning is supposed to be tough and is supposed to be difficult, and there's a whole load of things that go on in your head. If you outsource that learning, you're not outsourcing the learning. It's like asking your personal trainer to lift your weights for you. You don't improve your muscles, and that's exactly the same in learning. But when you go out into the workplace, we are seeing more and more signals that AI disrupted workplaces are going to be what students of today are going to go into.
So we can't avoid it. We have to plan for it, and we just basically need to get on with it. But how do we do it, and the mindset that we need to have? Because I was talking to Jessica Vanderlil of Deakin University, and we were speaking about scale in that episode. And the scale that AI is happening is not at a corporate level, or even at a sector level, or even a country level. It is at a global level. So the scale is huge. But getting into that kind of understanding that scale requires a different mindset, right?
Yeah. So first of all, the scale of AI. We've got about 700 million people using ChatGPT alone. I mean, there's loads of AI systems, but just ChatGPT, 700 million a week. And that, if you look at the overall users, so ignore the just per week, it's something like nearly 10% of the world's population is using ChatGPT. So there's a scale change already that people are voting with their feet. But then step back and say, well, what does that mean for us within organizations? How do we take the right approach as organizations to the scale of change that is happening? And I think I lean back on the things that I've learned working for large scale organizations.
And Google is probably as big as they get.
Yeah. So think about Google. Google is global scale. I'm sure I was a disappointment to Google when I worked there, because I could see how I could get 100 million users for the solutions that I was responsible for in education, and that was my plan. But Google always talked about billion users. And so anybody that didn't produce a billion users, I'm sure, was a disappointment. And so when you think about that scale, how did that then change the way we did things? So Google has shared these things publicly. So they have a mindset of 10x. Don't go for 10% more, go for 10 times more. And what is really fascinating is if you think about what you might do to go for 10 times more next year than you did this year, often it's difficult to build that plan. And often you can't work out exactly how you're going to do it. But the thinking that comes out of that then knocks into your existing plans. Let me give you an example. I was involved in the launch of the Google Career Certificates. That's really fascinating, because that's a 10x thing from the start, which was looking at inhibitors on the growth of the economy through lack of employee skills. And then saying, okay, what can we do about it? And what we could do about it was, well, we can create a course that students can study, or learners can study, that helps them fill those jobs. And a really good example was project management. There was a shortage of people to effectively do project management. So Google built, as part of its career certificates, a project management course. And to do that, it went out to employers and said, what skills do you want? What knowledge do they need? What behaviors? And then built an online certificate and then lined up employers at the end of that certificate process to hire the people that come out of that course. And it started small scale. Let's get 100,000 people through the course. And
at small scale?
Yeah.
100,000.
And it started small scale with, well, let's get 5 employers at the end of the queue picking up the graduates coming out of the course.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, something like across all of the different career certificates, there's maybe 8 or 9 now, something like 8 million students have enrolled in those courses. In the US alone, I think there's 275 employers hiring the graduates from those courses. So look, that's a question of scale that is, well, if we start this,
Mm.
What could we grow it to? And
Mm.
so when I was involved in those, we launched in one country in Asia, and then the next year was, okay, how do you launch in 11 more countries? So 10 more, so 10x effectively.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Mm. Mm.
and the thinking around doing that led to a bunch of assumptions about, well, how would you get 10 times the scale
Mm.
next year as this year?
Mm.
Because we're not going to give you 10 times more people. We're not going to give you 10 times more budget,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we want 10 times more countries
Yeah.
and students. And so that's when you look at it and go, okay, we scale by working with partnerships, getting the right employers involved,
Yeah.
being able to do things in a smarter way.
So I guess the typical or conventional assumptions go out the window. You gotta redefine them, right? Otherwise, yeah, it can be incredibly disorientating to think in, I guess, a 10x way, because I think the first instinct for people is no, it can't be done. Go from 100 to 10,000? No, 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 it can't be done.
And I think that the tech industry has got things that it has learned, and I've learned this through working in it. I've learned it through osmosis, and so it's just automatic. And I'll give you the example of that is I worked with somebody really closely when I was at Microsoft, and then I worked with them after Google, and he
Mm.
said, gee, you've changed.
Mm.
That period when you were at Google, suddenly you're talking about scale in a
Mm.
way that you never did when I
Mm.
worked with you before. And so it's this osmosis process. And I think across the tech industry, there
Mm.
are things that we can learn that I believe apply to other businesses, and I especially believe apply in education.
Yeah.
So let me think of the techniques. So at Google, 10x for a start, thinking
Mm.
around that. The second thing is there was a process which was it was known as start with the monkey. So let me give you the analogy. You're asked to build a project, and what you're asked to do is you're going to build a monkey on a plinth that's going to recite the works of Shakespeare. Okay, so think about that. I'm going to ask you to build a monkey standing on a plinth that can recite the works of Shakespeare. Now, often what people do in that way mentally is they start by building the plinth because
Mm.
it's the easy bit, it's the bit we know how to do.
Mm.
And then later we get to the monkey bit. And that's when everything comes off the rails because you discover you can't get a monkey to recite the works of Shakespeare. So Google had this story around start with the monkey. If you get a difficult project, start with the most difficult part of the project, because if you can't make that work, the rest of it isn't going to work. And that's really valuable because I've seen so many projects, big IT projects, where the monkey never gets built, that the plinth does it, and you just have to put up with the plinth. But I think it's also, I find it fascinating in the world that we are now in the world of AI, where actually proving that the monkey can recite the works of Shakespeare turns out to be the quickest thing to be able to prove. Another technique we used at Google was prototyping. So prototype is before a prototype stage. A prototype is, let's have an idea, let's test it right now. So
Mm-hmm.
with AI, let's think of an example. Oh, gee, we could have a service that we give to our staff that helps them understand our expenses and travel policy. And you go, well, would it be possible to get AI to read all those policies and provide a great little chatbot to the employees? Well, to be honest, that's a 3-hour job to prove whether that can be done or not. I did it with an RPL project. Somebody said, we'd love to have an interview with a learner to be able to do the recognition of prior learning process. Would it be possible for AI to have an interview with somebody, collect samples and proofs, and then fill out the tick box to go, okay, demonstrated with evidence, demonstrated without evidence, uncertain? It was 3 hours to have a crack at building a piece of AI that could do that proved that the monkey could be built, and
Mm.
therefore it's worth carrying on. And so that mindset around start with the monkey, start with the most difficult part of your project, think about prototyping, a really basic way of having a crack and seeing if you like it, and also testing that with users. because you'd be amazed how many products get built that users don't want. So, give it to people, get them to test it, see if they are still using it in a week's time. That kind of stuff is automatic in the thinking that I learned when I was with Google, that then I apply in other scenarios. I think about the other things from other tech companies, huge cultural change. Microsoft, when Satya Nadella took over, he said to the business, I want us to become an organization of learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. Because it had become a culture where people kind of showed off by knowing all the answers. Does that sound familiar to you in any other sector? And he
Yeah.
deliberately said, I want this business to become curious. I want you to
Yeah.
become curious about the situation around you, about your customers, around the situations, around technology. And I want a culture of learn it all, not know it all. And that, in I think less than 6 months, completely changed the culture that I felt inside the organization. And it's not a technology led thing. It was a message led thing.
But it's this kind of cultural, I guess, aspect is quite common in the tech sector, particularly like Silicon Valley and software and fail fast, experimenting, and risk is seen as something part and parcel of what you do in tech. But risk is something that is so hard in most other parts of industries, right? In fact, you actively try to avoid it, or at least mitigate and manage it.
Yeah. So
You know,
so let's talk about how do you manage those things as well. Yeah, let's steal a technique from another tech company. So Amazon. Amazon have this mindset of two-way and one-way doors. And it's about the decision we're just about to take.
mm,
Is it a two-way door, which is if we find out it's the wrong decision, we come back through the door, or
mm,
is it a one-way door?
mm,
And in education, we make a lot of things one-way doors that
mm,
really could be two-way doors.
mm,
I'll give you an example. It takes us so long to procure something
mm,
that it becomes a one-way door, because if you've bought the wrong thing, you've just invested maybe $500,000 of time in everybody involved in some process to buy a new finance system or
yeah,
learning management system or whatever. But could you make that a two-way door? Could you reduce the risk of individual decisions and take the journey as you go? Well, again, AI's got a role to play in that, but also the mindset of, well, how can we do that? I think, I'm sure I'm going to get some heat from this, but I believe almost every single AI decision at the moment about AI systems is a two-way door. Because if you're a university or a school system and you are building the world's best AI chatbot for your students,
mm,
tomorrow, next week, next month, in a year's time, somebody will build a better one that you will want to
mm,
switch to.
mm.
So how do you make that switch open? You make the decision a two-way door.
But what about, when people see making a decision to do something and it doesn't work out as planned, i.e., a quote unquote failure, um, as a one-way door? Because from a personal risk and career point of view, right? And it's very real in some organizations where the culture is not there to allow failures,
Yeah,
particularly large ones when we talk about
yeah.
scale.
So I'll replay anonymously a conversation I had with a leader of a big educational organization about 9 years ago, and we were talking about the process of minimal viable products. But
Mm,
launch some things and see if they get uptake from students in the
mm,
case. And they had a $5 million project that they were delivering that was going to deliver amazing things in about 5 years' time.
mm,
And so we had this conversation because I'd been talking at a conference about the idea of minimal viable product, to just get something out the door, see if students use it, then find out what they want to improve in it and improve as you go. And their perspective was, well, we can't work like that, because what happens if we spent 50,000 on a pilot and the pilot didn't work? We'd have
mm,
wasted $50,000.
mm.
It's like, well, hold on. What if you spend 5 million on something that nobody uses? It's like, yeah, but we build in so many safeguards into our procurement process and our specification process. We go in and talk to everybody and we build it. It's like, but I've seen so many $5 million things that don't work. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm seeing a new wave of leaders in the education system. I mean, we've always had a wave of teachers that have just experimented. I'm seeing a new wave of leaders that recognize that things have to be piloted and prototyped, and we've got to allow for innovation, and we've got to do some things that may not work, but they teach us a lesson. I mean, I was always taught it's okay to make mistakes as long as the value of what you've learnt is more than the cost of the mistake that you've made. And so, with it, there are ways to be able to do it.
Mm-mm. Yeah, the going back to the scale issue, right? When you want to experiment with something and learn, um, and make sure that it remains a two-way door, not a one-way door, what if the experiment needs to be done at scale to test whether the idea can scale, right? So, in the same conversation that I was having with Jessica at Deakin, we spoke about the fact that pilots or experiments almost need to be at that kind of institution wide, because the scale we need to reach is at the sector wide, right? So all sort of 39, 40 universities, if you were to have any solution be able to be rolled out at that kind of scale, a small pilot would be, at that kind of 40, 50, 100,000 student level, right? Which, it's typically an entire institution, if not a couple of them, to do a small pilot. That to a lot of people is pretty risky if you have to commit the entire institution to run as a pilot. But at the same time, though, we're faced with a situation with AI is everywhere and is so fast as well. You can't help but to do something at a 10x level.
Well, let's take a look overseas. You've got universities like Arizona State University, who, at the point that they had 160,000 students, said their goal was 100 million. Now, that's more than 10x. That's a crazy number. But the thinking around that led to them doing a whole load of experiments. I mean, I think their current goal now is 250 million students. That scale, that's one institution saying we're going to make a bet on the fact that we can provide a product to the market that the market really wants is exceptional. And then they set around the experiments around that to be able to get them in that direction. I remember they did a partnership called, I think it was Study Hall, with YouTube, because YouTube is the world's biggest learning management system. It's just not a learning management system, but it's the biggest platform for learning anywhere in the world. And they said, okay, so we've got all of these people that are learning on YouTube. What is the journey to bring them from YouTube to Arizona State University? And so they built a journey for that. Now, sure, it'll cost them a lot of money to build that and try it. But
at a pilot level.
Yeah. And so, they're thinking pilot level in millions.
Yeah.
They also did some work around the equivalent of a Google Maps for education. I'm a 6-year-old, I want to be an astronaut, and when I get to 10, I changed to want to be a nurse. Like, how do you use systems to be able to help that journey? And you can bet that every single part of that journey between the ages of 18 and 25 went through ASU in the way that they planned it. But again, it's that kind of take a step back. How do we make something that can scale? Because technology can just scale. We saw that at the beginning of COVID. It turns out education had all of the systems in place to be able to flip to a completely new model of learning. Nobody had to go and buy anything. I mean, the tech companies did. Like, their servers were melting to run Teams and Zoom and stuff like that. But the customers already had the tech in place. What they didn't have was the culture that said, hey, do you know what? Our students need this. We are going to deliver this to them.
Or
but
forcing
demonstrated function.
It was possible. Yeah, or a forcing function to actually take that leap.
Yeah, and
I remember, I think La Trobe University was the one that, talking to the CIO, they were rolling out, this video and remote learning and working. And I think it took them, what, 2 weeks or something like that? It's a very, very short space of time
yeah,
because they had to. It was everyone was locked down. The only way you can continue was to, use Teams. Whereas these type of institution-wide rollouts, before that happened, the general assumption was these things take months, if not years, to roll out. You got all these tests, and you got all these plans and all these structured programs, and maybe, just maybe, it might work. And these assumptions were taken as fact. But it wasn't until COVID. I think that's probably one of the things we should keep going and remembering that COVID actually dispelled a lot of these assumptions,
mm.
and showed what we can do if there's a real desire to act on it and really want to achieve the outcomes.
And I honestly believe that AI is that next moment, and it's slower. We don't have to fix everything in 2 weeks. But the reality is, if you can't assess in the way that you've always assessed, if you can't deliver what students, I'm going to call it a product. Let's call them customers and call it a product. The customers, the product they want to buy is a better career. That's the primary motivator for students going to university,
especially when it's getting more and more expensive. This product,
yeah.
right?
And as wrong as we think that might be, that is the reality. So what is the betting that if that is the customer desire and somebody comes up with a completely new model, let's say it's ASU that comes up with a completely new model, which is earn while you learn. In fact, we're starting to see that because I think it's Laureate that have the program of international nursing and care workers, where they partner with Philippine and Australian universities. And effectively, the promise to the students is there's a job at the end of it because you've got an employer waiting there to hire the graduates from that course. So imagine somebody builds that kind of program. It meets the customer need. So I think we've got the same burning platform moment ahead of us, and the threat this time isn't the university down the road or the university in the next state. The university is in the next continent that could potentially come out with something that becomes more attractive to the consumer. I mean, look, Arizona State University, 250 million students as their aspiration. Let's imagine that they're not successful. Let's imagine that they only reach a third of their goal. That's 80 million students. How many of those are going to come out of the undergraduate profile in Australia?
Even if they only reach 1% of their goal,
yeah,
it's still a couple of million students, right?
Yeah.
It's still a huge success in standard terms.
Yeah, and so we've got that situation, and often I see for leaders in organizations, it's how do you create that sense of urgency, and then what techniques, how do you create psychological safety for failure in an organization where you have really, really, really driven hard against failure. And failure doesn't mean it's okay to do things wrong, but it's about it's okay to experiment, and we'll support you to experiment, and we'll learn things from those experiments. I certainly felt it a couple of times in my career. I actually stood up in front of a bunch of colleagues, maybe about 200 colleagues, and very self-critically said, do you know my biggest problem is I don't make enough mistakes? And what the reason for saying it was that I realized I'd become very risk averse, and so I wasn't learning from experimentation. So as crazy as it sounds, we need to make more mistakes. We need to take more risks, because if we don't, then we're not going to get the innovative culture that I think we need for the next decade.
I think we absolutely do need it as well, because just connecting your 10x thinking and 10x mindset into something that is quite important right now. You mentioned earn while you learn, and the Future Skills organization published a report a couple of months ago about earn while you learn, and it's one particular stat that's just stood out to me. So I'll read it. basically they were saying historically in Australia, fewer than 3% of businesses have employed trainees or apprentices, though there remains a large addressable market. 3% of Australian businesses.
Mm. Yep.
That's essentially, you can say it doesn't, there's an untapped market there. And so even if we applied 10x thinking and achieved 30% of the market, it's still only a third, right? So it is something we do have to do quite urgently and apply a fundamentally different approach.
Well, let me share a humorous example, but it's a humorous example that's got a purpose behind it. So last year in Turkey, there was a student that got caught cheating, and what they had done was they connected some AI glasses. They put a camera into their glasses that was connected through to a router that they had installed in the heel of their shoe that was connected to a large language model externally. So basically, they were looking at the exam paper and getting the answer in their ear. And of course, they got found out, they got disciplined, they got expelled. But I reckon there was a queue of employers at the door that they were being shoved out of saying,
I was just thinking that.
That's the kind of innovation we need.
Yes, I was thinking that as you was describing. I go, wow, this student is, it got the right, not just the right skills, but the right kind of mindset, the curiosity and the creativity that I think a lot of companies would really want at this point in time. The resourcefulness as well.
Yeah, and so, I realize we've talked about a bunch of things that could be seen as being critical of the education system, and they're absolutely not. The requirement that we've got for specialist knowledge and skills. But I think the other part we need is we need IQ and EQ in equal quantities. When you think about the current generation of AI, IQ and EQ come together, not just the IQ bit. And so, geez, we need education more than we ever did before, but we probably need a broader education.
We do, and it's not one or the other. It's not one type of education over the other. I think it actually is a broadening or innovating of the current model. So not just deep skills or deep knowledge or deep expertise even, but broader ones, durable ones, horizontal ones, lateral ones, whatever you call it. It's an and, not an or.
Yeah, and that's a really difficult challenge in an education system, whether the further you get through the education system, the more specialist you become. I've said for a decade at least, the perfect degree is computer science and psychology. Because if you do computer science alone, you end up with the kind of social media world we've got, which is social media is distorting society. If you put psychology with it, and ethics and responsibility, it would have made a difference. I mean, again, we need that way amped up, because if you think about AI skills, if you've got AI skills without ethics, responsibility, and psychology, gosh, really dangerous.
So it's I think what you're talking about there is there's a lot of emphasis for a long time now on STEM, right? On technical and engineering and maths and that kind of thing, but humanities and the arts and has kind of been neglected and sometimes even diminished in its importance. But we need both of them. We need both STEM and humanities. It's not one or the other. It's not just humanities, not just STEM. It's actually both. And in fact, this is something that I believe in a fair bit. Is the T-shaped person, someone who has a lot of very broad experiences. Call them human skills, durable skills, transferable skills, but in a chosen field that can be very deep. Got some expertise, a lot of knowledge in a particular field, and that evolves over time based on their experiences, based on, I guess, stage in life or where they're working. You might develop deeper skills in a different area, but I think having a T-shaped attribute would really give you a lot of resiliency in a constantly changing world.
Yeah, you can't see it on camera, but I am the perfect T-shaped person. When you describe it like that, and I think about my career, I started as a coder. I worked in tech support. I worked in technical sales. I did international sales. Then I moved into marketing. I did PR, government relations, all kinds of things. Then across to product management, project management. But that's the flat top, kind of whole array of experiences. But then the deep spike of the T is technology and education. And so, that's my where I go really deep, but then I can apply all the different aspects to it. And in an age of AI, you're absolutely right. Having all of those skills and having the ability to ask the right question, because that's something that AI can't do very well. Look at a difficult problem and ask the right question. Then yeah, I'm armed to do that. And there is going to be more and more demand for that, because if you are just, I don't know what the opposite of a T-shaped person is, probably an I-shaped person, that they just go deep in one particular area.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is those roles are more likely to be replaceable by AI and have less value.
And it becomes very, very scary for that individual who's only, I guess I-shaped, right? That they don't have that lateral, skill set or experience. It becomes very hard for them to actually jump or find the next adjacent opportunity. They will, I'm sure of it, but it just becomes that much more daunting to make that horizontal move.
And I think earlier we mentioned the IQ and EQ bit. That's probably when I think about a T-shaped person, the IQ bit is the vertical.
Yeah.
Go deep on something. The EQ bit is
horizontal.
The bit that lets you have a conversation with everybody and think from different perspectives, and that's the horizontal of the T.
Yeah. Right. So Ray, wrapping up, and I always like to wrap up with a bit of a human experience. And with your experience that you just described, having different kinds of roles, horizontal, vertical, technical, human, who influenced all this? So who's a mentor or a teacher that really shaped who Ray is today?
Yeah. So Harry French was my teacher when I was 13, 14, and I studied cinematography. Like, I've got a qualification in cinematography along with
I would have never picked that.
And he was a teacher that was exactly what we described earlier, is somebody who just like, I don't know, let's find out. And so I got into film club in the extracurricular activities. We made award-winning films. It was just amazing. And he was an art teacher. It wasn't in his curriculum or anything. So yeah, I owe a lot to Harry French. So look, I'm gonna mention a couple of CEOs, which is really unusual to say as mentors, but they weren't mentors, and they weren't teachers to me, but I learned things from them. So Satya, because of seeing the way that you could change an organization with just a short message, we want to be learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. That isn't hundreds of pages of policies and stuff like that. It's a message that everyone could understand. And if I think back to in another really different world, working for an UK company where a culture had become a little bit going off course around business costs and expenses, new CEO came in, Tim Pearson. He came in, and instead of rewriting the expenses policy, as most organizations do, in order to put all the rules in place to make sure that people didn't do crazy things, he simply said, and this isn't a business that sold almost all of our technology to schools, he said, if a customer could see your business expenses, would you be embarrassed? And that was the rule. And suddenly you went going, okay, yes, because these teachers don't get 5-star hotels and, fancy flights. And again, it just changed the culture of the organization. And it was that simplicity of message rather than let's write 500 policy documents to change something. And so, I guess the thing I understand from all of those people is that it isn't about detail. It's about explaining things to people in a way that they can really relate to. Not simplistic, but simple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Meet them where they're at. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ray, for sharing all of this. Now, the last segment of the show is a bit of a fun one. It's about plugs. And it's an opportunity for you to mention anyone, anything, company that you just think we should take a look at. And so who or what would you like to plug today, Ray?
Look, I think the main thing I love to plug is the AI in Education podcast. So my partner in crime for that is Dan Bowen. I'm sure you know Dan as well. Everyone in education in Australia seems to know Dan. We started that in 2019 before AI was a thing, when AI was just the geeks and the nerds, whichever is the polite way to put them. But here we are, still going strong. And now, really, the audience is for teachers and leaders. So that should be an approachable conversation into AI for people. We get some amazing guests on that podcast, just talking about it's the stories they share and the journey that they're on that is the real value. So yeah, probably that. And then, hey, yeah, come along and see me at Sydney Comedy Festival, Sydney Fringe Festival, Newcastle Fringe, I think this year, sometime over the next year.
Yeah.
There'll be a chance, and you can be sure that I'll be pimping the shows on LinkedIn, so you'll find it there.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ray. And there you go. Check out AI in Education podcast. And if you're in this part of the world, in New South Wales and Sydney, in time for the comedy festival or these fringe festivals, check out Ray's improv skills as well. Thank you everyone for tuning again for this episode of Relearning Work. We will see you next time. Thank you.